You've found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic. To bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, John Krotec and Bill Protzmann.
Hey, Bill, thanks for that intro, man. Every time I hear those drums beating, it just gets me going. We're humbled and honored to have today's guest, Mr. John C. Sims. John is a bona fide freedom fighter. He's an artist, he's a poet, he's an innovative thinker, a collaborator, and a sensory thought provoker. He has been on the front lines of the struggle for social justice for his entire life. He hails from Detroit, Michigan, an American city that knows all too well about the struggles for racial equality. I met John Sims 10 years ago through a mutual friend of ours. He was working on a Confederate flag project, and the impact that John made on me during our first meeting was immediate. We're going to talk about that project and how it transformed into John's Burned and Buried 2020 campaign. But first, the world is witnessing some horrific images coming from the streets in over 140 cities in America. This visual and real outrage stems from the callous and brutal murder of George Floyd, an African-American man who died by the hands, in this case, a knee of a uniformed police officer. For nearly 9 minutes, this officer knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck, causing his death. Sadly, his co-workers, others who are sworn to protect and serve the public, stood around and did nothing. The video of Mr. Floyd's death was graphic. It was extremely difficult to watch. It made me sick to my stomach. It has outraged everyone who has seen it. And how could it not? So here we are fighting on two different fronts. One, a legitimate movement to shed brighter lights on the ills that haunt our society. Injustices based on the color of our skin, our race, the Black Lives Matter movement. The other fight is something much different. It is a lawless, out-of-control mob raining death and destruction on our society, an assault on the very institutions that represent our republic. Serious mayhem taken without any respect for anyone or any rule of law. Needless to say, the subject of race continues to haunt America, but in reality, it is an issue that stains the entire world. The pains of social injustices based on race run deep. Especially in America, where the specter of human slavery is part of its foundation. We welcome you to AHO Radio, Mr. Sims. Thank you for being here.
And thank you, John and Bill, for having me today. And that nice introduction.
Man, you what can I say, man? I mean, this is a tough time on a lot of people. And
right.
Ever since I met you, John, you have inspired some hope in me.
Right.
And I was talking to Bill a little bit about you and the things that you are doing. I got to tell you, man, you're a bona fide freedom fighter. You're up in there with Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., and a host of others.
You're too much, man. You're too much.
I'm serious, man. So tell us about John Sims, the man.
Well, considering what's going on, I think the issue is to talk about what's in front of us, really, right? Pain, and it's complex. And I think it's very important for all of us, or at least for me, to kind of stay focused on some of the real issues and not conflate it with some of the other things that might lead us down a wrong path of discussion and kind of focus. But what I'm very inspired by and also dismayed by is the fact that, unfortunately, real change comes when there is incredible amounts of crystallized trauma, usually death, usually murder, right? Usually critical loss of life, liberty. And I think that's when there's an opportunity to recalibrate, reevaluate what's really, really important. I mean, we saw this with the coronavirus pandemic. People are beginning to reshift and rethink their life, their lifestyle, their relationship to commerce and shopping and relationships. And we're beginning to see this. We always see this when there is this kind of murder that happens at the hands of cops who we employ and who we endow with a position of power, right? And respect, supposedly, to protect and serve our communities. And when that is breached in real time for the world to see, there is a major heartbreak, a major disappointment. There is a breach of our own sense of sanity when we watch that. And how do we reconcile a kind of infidelity, right? It's a kind of cheating. It's a kind of unbelievable, like almost unforgivable break of major axioms of relationships and coexistence. And so we're trying to reconcile that. And that creates even more trauma, right? And that creates even more, and contributes to the snowballing historical effects of mistrust, disconnection, dislocation, segregation, and polarization that keeps so much of America separated from itself. And that's what's disheartening. Now, on the 25th of May, I had my 5th annual Burn and Bury Confederate Flag Memorial, which I've been doing since 2015. The idea was to create this event where we would, as a ritual, burn the Confederate flag as an act of like rebirth, right? Of moving beyond this symbolic objects of supremacy, white supremacy, slave history, and to create a conversation through this ritual where people of all kinds of backgrounds can come together and celebrate the veterans of social justice, while at the same time paying attention to our environment that encodes massive amounts of reminders of a very unjust society. Paying attention to the articles and objects, namely things like the Confederate flag, namely things that make us, that point to the anchors of a particular history that we need to confront. So I did that Monday, recent Monday, past Monday, I guess, 25th, and which is the same day that we had this problem with George Floyd, right? Doing the same time, pretty much. We had a long list of folks who gave incredible, impactful presentations in terms of from their own art point of view, practice to engage these issues around white supremacy, racism, inequality, and so forth. And for this to happen during the same time, it's just amazing to me, and it shows you how populated are the possibilities for this level of craziness, because the feelings are just so everywhere. The possibilities are so everywhere when you have cops, white cops, bad white cops, racist cops who are intersecting with moments in time and spaces with Black folks. And we have these kind of confluences of possibilities to end up with these kind of stories. You know, one thing would have happened differently, we wouldn't be talking about it, right? You know, but it's like when these energies happen, and I think we want to focus on the energies. I think it's important to focus on not the particular, like right now I'm writing a letter to American police. I'm writing an open letter to the American police. And I'm trying not to focus on any particular officer. I really want to talk to the police culture, right? That allows for these kind of things to happen. And most importantly, that doesn't support the police officers with a conscience.
You know, you just made me think of something, man, John.
Right.
You just, you know, we were. I mentioned mob mentality. Now,
Right.
Think about this, man. So I'm sitting there watching this horrifying video of a man's life being taken by a person wearing a uniform, and the mob mentality of the three officers that were standing around him, in a much smaller scale and just as graphic as what we're seeing. Isn't that kind of like a mob mentality? And doesn't that stem from the leadership in your open letter? You know?
Yeah, I think what it is, I think, I mean, the police force and policing is a certain kind of fraternity, right? It's a certain kind of brother sisterhood. And in that space, I think there is this sense and privilege of immunity, right? There's certain things that police can do that you can't do. I have a gun, you don't have a gun. There's also issues around respect. It's issues around protocol. It's also an issue around fear. So if you think about it, a lot of American policing use fear as a tactic to create control. But I think it's important for white police officers to know just their presence creates fear in the context of the Black community without doing anything. You're
just
already
showing up in uniform.
You already show up and you have that sense of fear. And sometimes when people live with a certain kind of fear, they become passive, they become numb to it, right? It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
It really doesn't work anymore. And so I think what happened with this particular police officer is that when you have someone, and I've seen other videos where a guy is completely detained, completely neutralized, the cops are drop kicking them in the back or doing crazy things that make absolutely no sense. And so what that says is police officers do carry anger. They are human, but that is not the space when you're conducting police business. You follow what I'm saying?
No. That, I mean, it's fantastic.
I mean, yeah. That's not,
yeah.
If you cannot control and restrain those levels of emotions, then being a police officer where you have a gun and you have the capacity to end someone's life, and, you know, it's a very sacred arrangement. Now, one of the things I'm working on in this letter, you know, I'm thinking about in this letter is this: if the results of me resisting arrest and being completely submissive during arrest or detainment has the same outcome, which might be death, what incentive is it for me to feel safe with the police with my body?
Yeah.
Right? What incentive is it for me not to resist when I may feel at the core that the outcomes, whether I am submissive or in resisting, can be the same? And that is a very frightening crossroads to be at, because it sends the wrong message and create the wrong kind of relationship with the police. Now, here's the thing. I want to say this. Suppose Mr. George Floyd had not been calling for his mother, not been being, you know, sort of asking for air, had been angry, right? Had been in rage, right? He's fighting for his life, which is a normal response.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a normal response for any human fight for their life. I think we don't give Black men the space to fight for their lives without creating a massive, in general. But what happens is that we need these kind of pictures to create this massive response. We need pictures of 4 girls in a church being burned, or pictures of 9 people in a Black church, right? These kind of total helpless scenarios that create this do we need to have that level of complete lameness, right, to create compassion and empathy? Is the bar really, like, that's pretty high for me. Like, that's...
No, well, you bring the light, I'm thinking, just a Black man in America, we talk about freedom in America, and it would be a scary, scary thing in some places just to walk down the street somewhere,
right?
And that level of fear, right. John, you so eloquently say, it is traumatic and it's chronic, right. And it puts in the minds of that individual human being that, by the way, if he unzipped the skin and he has the same stuff that we all have,
right?
It's horrific. I can't even imagine what it would be like.
Well, but maybe you can help me understand, because you're doing some work around trauma. You're doing work around the emotional side of this, because at the end of the day, this is an emotional issue.
Yeah.
I think, right? Because the cognitive, intellectual stuff they have all written down in their manuals, right? They've already worked through all that. They've already worked through that, and then you're going to reaffirm that and rewrite that in different ways to make the public feel better. But at the end of the day, it's really an emotional issue that's tied to fear, history, privilege, supremacy, insecurity, all this. And so one of my question is, why are these white cops so fearful and so afraid of Black men? Just in general, that seems to be the case. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm sure that's all kinds of, if you want to be honest, first you got to have an honest answer to that. You got to have an honest dialogue, because it takes a level of vulnerability. Say, you know what? I am afraid because I have been pulled over and I have seen a young police officer basically trembling. He's afraid. He's afraid? I'm going to kill him or pull out a gun. He's afraid of something. And there's a lot of things there, and I'm sure that it's definitely amplified when police officers are not living in the communities that they are policing, right? They're very detached from the communities they're policing, culturally, language-wise, all kinds of ways. But if I'm a police officer and I went to school with your brother or your cousin, and I know you from whatever, that creates a different kind of connection. Yeah. And so I think community policing, I think, is a very important aspect with dealing with this, is having human relationships. But it goes back. Police officers have power. They have guns. They have, and I think with that comes a responsibility. And I think American policing is not living up to that responsibility in the way it needs to live up to it if we're going to have trusting interactions.
Hey, John, a couple of things. Yeah, I'm going to pull that emotional thread, because all 3 of us are artists.
Right.
Multimodal artists. Right. In your case, John, right. John Krotec's poet, I'm a musician. It seems like we artists have been given the responsibility to lead the emotions. I've always felt that about you know, a room full of people listening to music, my responsibility is to make sure the emotions are authentic. How do you keep doing that though? Because I find for myself, I just get drained in a situation like this. I'm not really doing anything, but I feel emotionally drained. How do you, John Sims, keep the tank full and keep going, especially when you're in the forefront of the controversy?
Yeah. Well, I just keep thinking about things and figuring out creative expressions and presentations to either try to bring clarity to the issues or ways out of the issue where there could be a sense of understanding or a sense of relief or a sense of moving to a different place that might be saving in some ways and a respite for other ways. But yeah, I, you know, as a musician, you live through the music, you express, you communicate through that. And, you know, as you know, there's different kinds of musicians. There are some who play the same thing over and over. There are some who are challenged by the conceptual elements, intellectual part. And there are other ones who are trying to bring musical shape to feelings and to stories so they can convey them to other folks that will also enhance the conversation, also inspire a certain kind of energy to get folks to move along in their lives. And so I think that, I mean, that's part of it. And I certainly see with American policing, there seems to be a disconnection or an untapped resource in terms of being talented in the area of emotional intelligence. It's knowing how to tell a joke at the right time, knowing how to de-escalate, knowing how, like, for God's sake, it seemed like these cops could have learned from TV. Like, one guy plays the good cop and one guy plays the bad cop, like, for God's sake. That in itself, I mean, as a performance, it's a way to save lives, you know? And for cops to present themselves not as the executioner and the jury and the judge, but just as a part of a bigger machine that everyone gets their day in court, everyone gets their say. But I think a lot of the times the police office ends up doing all of that at once. And, you know, and it's not just the police officers. I think it's the culture. It's the culture that creates a false sense of power and privilege. And now I think this police officer knows his fraternity will now forsake him. He will now be alone. His wife has left him, right? I mean, now it's this, but it should never get to that point, because this is not the first time this officer had been in a similar situation when someone he interacted with got shot and died, and, you know, he's had complaints and that. I think the police know where the bad apples or almost bad apples are. They need to do a better job in recognizing these areas and having serious effort of creating a police force that move from a position of compassion, community, emotional intelligence, opposed to coming to the table with a sense of fear, perpetuating fear to create control, opposed to trying to create cooperation.
So let's do a little online education here and try to teach the police officers how to do compassion.
Well, let's, yeah.
You know what? You know what? Go to the art museum. That helps.
Yes.
Yes. Wait. Maybe they should have these. They should have these police officers go through like a poetry class, or go down with the Amish women and like do a little quilting or something.
Yes, I love that, man. But, you know, but let's talk about that culture, because what we're talking about, really, like you said before, John, it's very complex, but we're talking about the culture of humankind. Okay. These cops, police officers, used to be called peace officers.
Right.
Nowadays we wonder about that, but you have a humankind culture where every single one of us has been traumatized.
Right.
It's been guesstimated that 75% of the humans that walk this planet have been through at least one trauma. Could be bullying while you're growing up. Now you got a badge, whatever. It could be divorce. It could be sexual assault. It could be racism. Whatever the trauma is, we've all been touched by it. And cops are not exempt.
Right.
So I love what you say, John. And I know Bill and I have talked about this, and you and I talked about this last week, John, about leadership being responsible for that.
Right. Absolutely.
So think about that. So if these police officers, peace officers, whatever, have been traumatized themselves and they haven't dealt with it, when they get into a situation like a George Floyd or stopping John Sims on the highway, they're not geared to handle that. And so if they've got the chronic trauma and that coacher has not given them the skill sets or the proper training, or they haven't sat down to see one of your exposés or to listen to Bill Protzmann play the piano, then it's a recipe for disaster. I always say that with trauma, because you asked that a little minute ago, trauma, it doesn't get any better. It doesn't. I can't take away the fact of what happened to me.
Right.
It only gets different. And what I've learned in my life is to be able to make a good mountain climbing buddy said, you know, mountain climbing is whoever suffers the best. So I have to deal with my suffering, but I have to make choices that are better for me and society as a whole.
Right.
So when I see a John Sims project where a guy burns a Confederate flag and buries that sucker in the ground, it is a death and a burial.
Right.
But at the same time, it's a phoenix.
Right.
It's this rising up.
Right.
People need to rise up in a constructive manner. Like those cops that were around that guy, my wife says to me, what would you have done?
Right. Right.
Don talks about the fraternity. And you know what I told her? I know in my heart, but who knows? Because I haven't been placed in that position.
Right.
I would like to think that I rose up and I said, hey, listen.
Right.
You got to take your knee off this guy, man.
Right. Right.
He's not resisting. So rise up.
Right. Right.
Get
So that's the critical part of the letter that I'm writing, which is more, look, I can't really have a conversation with a white supremacist cop. What can I really say? Right? I mean, that's right. Okay. So, and my conversation is, first of all, it starts with the supposition or the proposition that there are cops there that have a conscience. They have a moral compass, right? If I lose faith in that, then we really have a major problem, right? And I have to know that although they're bad apples, bad cops, there got to be good cops that offset the bad cops. If the good cops can't stand up to the bad cops, right, then that shows you how toxic the culture is and how leaning is. And I'm sure each department, each precinct have its own viral load of good cops versus bad cops, and it fluctuates, whatever, right? But the point is that my letters wants to speak to the cops with conscience, the ones that, particularly the ones that may not want to be silent, but feel like have no choice to be silent because they're torn between the higher law of justice and the ties to hold their group together and the fidelity that keeps their cophood together, right? And I think they need to know that we have their back. They need to know that they have permission to stand up and be a human first.
Well said.
And a cop second.
Oh yeah.
Once they lose sight of that, that humanity takes back seat, right, to a particular culture, then we can have all kinds of things like the Holocaust, slave trade. You know what gives me faith? What gives me faith is, even with American history, what gives me faith is to know there were John Browns, there were Harriet Tubmans, there were abolitionists who stood up and said, this is wrong.
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, maybe they weren't winning in that moment, but they knew that this is wrong in any time, in any human history. This is wrong. That's the energy that I think really informs a critical, permanent part of humanity that I want to be a part of. You see what I'm saying? So, so I think, because we can always have retrainings and rewriting manuals and do this, and now the cops are taking a knee. Now they're out having picnics with Black Lives Matter and all. Aside from all of that, a man is dead. Aside from all of that, there was an opportunity for 3 other cops to stand up, and they didn't. The question is why? That's what I want to know. Why didn't you stand up? And probably those cops would have prevented you from standing up. So that even becomes even more. Now they're suppressing your humanity. Now they're spreading this disease of suppressed humanity, and we're all supposed to sort of be complicit in this murder. And so I think those are the questions that I'm interested in, because all it took is for one cop to say, hey, he's calling for, relax, let's relax, chill. That's all it takes. And I'm sure that happens. And I'm sure we never heard of it, which is exactly what should happen. We should not hear about this, because this should not be our business, right?
Right.
But now it becomes everybody's business, because the police are not regulating themselves in the micro spaces. And that is what's necessary. I don't care how many rules and regulations that you have. If you don't have that kind of micro regulations happening when no one's watching, hey, you can't plant those drugs on that guy because you're trying to arrest him. That's not cool. You know what I'm saying? You can't do this. You can't do that. You know what I'm saying? So this opens up, like, how many men are in jail? Black men are in jail because of planted this and planted that and lying this. And then not only that, it's not just the police. Now we have the coroner who gives one autopsy report, which is very different than another. Wait a minute, since when did the science get so interpreted in very different ways? You see what I'm saying? Because it's in this context where people understand and succeed in the order of the culture that promotes certain outcomes over other outcomes.
This is a brave stance, because our culture is so fungible these days. I love your question about the moral compass, but when you're serving your community and you have no moral compass, that's a problem. And we can all fix that at the local level by voting and making our voices heard, and just letting people know, no, we will not accept protection from someone whose moral compass is broken.
Right. And also, I think police officers have to figure out how to balance group fidelity and this universal fidelity.
Human fidelity. Yeah.
It's like a Christian. It's like, look, I'm a Christian. If you're Christian, you're thinking, I'm hanging out with these other folks and I'm doing stuff that's not Christian, but I want to be in this group. How do I reconcile my belief system? And it chips away, and before you know it, you don't even recognize your own faith anymore.
I know, the need to belong.
And you don't even recognize your faith, and then you get rewarded by your silence.
One thing that you said, John, that I think is important here, this guy was known to his leaders.
Right.
He was known to the guys and gals that he worked with.
Right.
And we're talking about this culture of silence, this cophood. I like the way you put it. We have friends that are cops. We get that. We are not against law enforcement.
Right.
In fact, John, we met through a county commissioner who's an African-American woman, who we both love dearly, who has done great things.
Right.
But that leadership has to be held accountable. So they arrest one guy, right, whatever, third degree. The other three guys they're looking at. But I say the chief of police has to go.
Right.
Maybe the mayor of the city, who knows, to
Right.
allow a culture like this to fester. It's not me. I don't pull the strings.
Right.
But I go back to what you and I talked about 2 weeks ago, and you inspired me to write that one piece for our own local paper.
Right.
It's a leadership issue. They know who the bad. How does a guy have 17 infractions and he's not working the desk, or he's not washing the vehicles at the motor pool? What the hell is he out there doing policing when he has a history of abusing people in his custody?
Right.
That's crazy, man. How can you run? How can you run an organization that's got toxic males in it and beta males around them, not doing crap about it? How does that happen?
Right.
Where's the courage, man? Where's the courage?
Where's the courage? Well, I mean, you know, it's see, the thing is,
it's crazy, man. It's crazy.
So this goes back to you're saying you know, you being in a situation and you don't know what you would do. Now, there's some people when they're in a situation like that, they have to think about things and then they move from how they think and what it means in the bigger. Then there are other people who react already. Like, you know what I mean? They know it's wrong. There is no thinking because you've already done the thinking beforehand. You follow what I'm saying? You're a musician. You've played those chords. You've played that run already. And now you're just moving them around and cutting and pasting them and intersecting. You're not trying to figure out some strange cross-section of scales in that moment. That's what you do at home when no one's watching and you're practicing, right? But there's an emotional language of response that just happens, like jazz music in the moment. And it's like, that's wrong, you know, and we're watching. And so I think there might be some other complex things going on with this situation. You know, it's like, I feel like Mr. George Floyd was probably already passed most of the time that he was on the ground. I think that it was a performance to keep the body, you know, so that, because if you thought when the ambulance came, there was no effort to revive anybody, right? There was
I think he was gone, man.
Right, yeah. And then they came out of the ambulance with bulletproof vests on. You notice that? I don't know if you noticed that.
I watched.
They had bulletproof vests on. Police. These were not regular EMTs. They already knew, and they were afraid that word got out. We have someone here who's lifeless, who passed, who's dead. This might create an instant riot in the moment. So I think there was a little bit of that. It's a little bit of performance to keep, and I think more of that information is going to go out. But so now, where are we now? So this is unlike anything, Rodney King situation, right? Because the Rodney King thing blew up because those guys got acquitted. Remember? So that was an indictment of a judicial system, of a justice system that, you know, we saw the video. There was no major movement around that, but it was like, wait a minute, you can't even trust the court system. But here, this has gone global, right? This has gone, this speaks to not just American humanity issues and so, but worldwide. And my hope is that this translates to other communities, like what's going on in Brazil, right? Yeah. What's going on with the Israelis and the Palestinians? What's going on which was going to end up happening in Hong Kong? What's going to happen, you know, when the police have to engage their own citizens, right? And they're interacting in the context of fear, right? And in the context of trying to keep people under control, opposed to keeping them in cooperation. So I think that's what's happening. It's like when I get pulled over, I feel like it's not about being cooperative. I feel like it's like the start button to push who's in control, like a control thing. And I think that creates a certain kind of dynamic. But so where are we now? So what do we do now? I know there's been concerns about the protesters and the fallback. And I'll say that I think destruction of property, destruction of rioting is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. But I think it's a consequence of a bigger issue. And the bigger issue, we have to stay focused on that. You know what I mean? It's very important to stay focused on that, particularly when the whole issue is so complex as it is.
No, and you're right about that, John. And what I'm concerned with is the perception, because Black Lives Matter, whether you believe it or not, is a noble cause that everybody,
of course,
needs to be behind. Are you kidding me?
I absolutely.
But what I am concerned about is this brand perception, or this noble cause perception, that's getting twisted.
Right.
Like you said, knowing what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
It's getting twisted with an ideology that all cops are bad. All cops need to go. Kill all the cops. You know, I got to tell you, if somebody robs my house or breaks in, or we get in an accident, who am I going to call?
Right. So here's
that's the scary part for us.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing. This is why in my letter I'm not going after particular cops.
And I want to hear about the heart too. You got to tell me.
Right. Particular cop. I think it's important to go after the culture. Like, it's the culture that needs to be critiqued, needs to be transformed beyond the conversation. It has to move beyond a conversation to there's real changes in the culture, real changes in the expectation of things that come out of the culture. Clearly, all cops are not bad, right? However, enough of them are bad that intimidate good cops to prevent them from standing up and keeping the bad ones in check. That's what we need to be concerned about. You see what I'm saying? And so where were the good cops with this particular, you got a nice sample, you got 4 cops, you got to find one guy to be able to stand up. So what does that say about the whole, what is, humans are smart, we get it. Like, wait a minute, like something's not right here. And then they're looking what's happening over here and what's happening over here. And then you start to the emotional intelligence starts to calculate, right? And it's like, so here's the thing. So I think it was a smart move by the mayor to vacate the precinct. Remember that one precinct?
The third.
I think the optic, I'm not about destruction, but I think the optics of a burning police station sends a very powerful message. Basically, not with the approval of the mayor, but basically the mayor is saying, look, human lives are more important than buildings. People are completely enraged. There needs to be space to be able to outlet some of this energy.
Well said.
Because if you don't, this is what happens.
It just gets compressed.
It creates a suppression, right? Now you go home and take it out on your spouse, your friends, your kids, your this, your that. People are angry. Now it gets turned into themselves, right? They're not off writing symphonies and orchestras and painting masterpieces. People are upset. And when people are upset, the nervous system is in a different space. And this is why we have rituals when we have Confederate flag burnings, right?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Well, we do things that provides is cathartic. And I think the mayor was smart by providing that opportunity and let the cops fall back. This is least what we can do. Boom. I think that needs to be acknowledged. Now, at the same time, you're going to have George Floyd's brother saying, look, you can't be out here burning up stuff, not in my brother's name. This is not a good thing. Boom. So I get that. I also get the fact that there are all kinds of other forces that will try to take advantage of this moment for political reasons, to create racial divisions that might have outcomes that connect to the elections, that creates polarizations around the president, the current the president administration, Trump administration, or the resistance, the Russians, like whatever. I get all that. But I think we still need to stay focused, because this is such an incredible moment where I think real change happens. In this kind of emotional space, things get liquefied. And if we wait too long, they just harden right back up. You follow what I'm saying? So this is a very, and so we need to roll like surgeon. You got to get in. Anytime you got police chiefs out with the protesters, who would have thought that was possible? Doing the Kaepernick kneel. Who would have thought that? So we need that space right now needs to be harnessed, so we can have some real critical reflection. It's like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you completely screw up. You just completely screw up, and like completely. And it's that moment where you're like, "Fuck, I'll do whatever." Like I screwed up. That space doesn't last forever, but it is an important space, right? Where you have to go deep inside and like evaluate, and you be vulnerable. So if the police chiefs are vulnerable, we need to focus on that.
Oh yeah, when the officers are marching with the protesters, those scenes light me up. They make me feel good.
Yeah. So and I think part of that is police officers are smart in knowing what else we're gonna do. We can't kill more people, right? We can't like chokehold more people. So, I think some of this stuff is kind of performance. I get it, all the way to what the cop was doing. I think there was a level of performance because he knew if people got word the George had already passed, there could have been a riot right there. That could have been explosive right there. You know what I mean? I think there was a sense of. It's interesting how performance plays out. How performance plays out, even like that toxic the masculine energy, how it becomes performance to mask
the weakness,
So there's a level of performance that's happening. Or even when people are resisting police officers, there's a level of performance. It's interesting how this plays out. Like who's watching, who's looking, if there had been just one cop versus 4, that cop could feel more vulnerable with his boys. He got to show a particular kind of strength, this, that. Like it becomes very complicated. And, but in any case, look, I think we're in a very special, magical moment. We got to move on it. Move on it.
John, I couldn't agree with you more. There's 2 things that I'm walking away with from here is the special moment.
Right.
This is a critical time. Honestly, I feel it in American history. I mean, this is the opportunity of a lifetime for our mixed, diverse society.
Right.
To seriously move along.
Right.
But I also get from you, John, and this is why I like the way you think, is the focus. If we as leaders in our communities, I'm a white guy, I'm an Army veteran, I pay taxes, I work, I understand it. But this is a time for leadership of all colors to come forward and say, listen, this culture has got to change.
Right.
Sensitivities on both sides.
Right. It has to stop. Then there has to change to something that makes sense.
Forget the incendiary. I mean, it's incendiary. Right. The parts that we play.
Right.
But my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, and at a global level, cosmic level, universal level.
Right.
We're humans.
Right.
living in the same communities on the same planet.
Right. But it's just so interesting to me,
Yeah.
like why this particular story becomes that resonates so powerfully, right? And I think, the Christ, you did you see the movie Passion of Christ?
No, I wanted to catch it, but I
Right.
saw that,
like some people was like, oh, but this idea that one person is taking all of this pain, right? Now, if Jesus had been on the cross fighting, get me down from here, this is bullshit. Like, this is not fair, right? Right? Think about it. Like, I'm gonna have my father come down here and like
burn your ass.
That would be a very different story, right? But this story, like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Like, right? It's this kind of like. So I think the other thing is that George Floyd gave humanity, particularly American humanity, the supreme gift.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
No doubt.
He gave a supreme, without maybe not even really knowing it, obviously, but a gift to mirror back to the deep pathology of not only American policing, but the complicit kind of institutional and cultural racism that allow these kinds of things to happen consistently. And I think to be able to, and we try to do that in art, right? Think about it. We do that in art. We do that in theater. We do that in literature. We do that in all kinds of ways. But when you do it in real time and it happens on the back of your life, there is nothing more to offer. Because the point is, looking at that video, you say, if we don't respond to this, then we're not going to respond to anything. Right? Right? That's what that says. If we can't respond to this, then there is no hope. So for me to see this level of response that is global, however, there's certain things are being taken over here and there, but just in general, the global response tells me there's a sense of hope.
I love that, man.
And that is the most important takeaway from this. Now there's a sense of hope. Now we're in this moment. We have to be able to take advantage of it and be able to move on it and get folks to have to translate that vulnerability, that kind of feeling of devastation, and move that to the policy level, move that to the treatment level, move that to the transformation of the culture level. And with all my work, think about this. I've been working on the Confederate flag thing. From Soho to Harlem to Gettysburg, throughout the American South. It's only when those 9 beautiful people in that AME church in Charleston were gunned down did you get any real movement on Confederate flag, Confederate memorials, Confederate any of that. Like from an art point of view, it's like touching at the threads of something. Now, I'm prepared to be able, when that energy arrives, is to be able to roll into that and say what I've been saying all along, right? Because it's already rehearsed. The language there, the things are set up. So you're already ready. You know what I'm saying? You're already ready. And so I think what needs to happen is for people who are concerned about these issues, like guys are concerned about this, is that when these issues come up, you have to be ready to jump in. So you have to be ready when you see something's off in your community. Because now what's going to happen is if a similar thing happened, people are going to be less likely and less afraid to like speak up and say something. you know, and
I hear you loud and clear, you know.
Yeah, and I think that, and not necessarily from a position of you know, instigating for instigating's sake, but being able to recognize how is it that Dylan Roof can go in and kill 9 people in a church, which is the most sacred space you can imagine, kill them, and then he gets arrested, and the cops take him to Burger King.
John, you know.
Wait.
No.
Take him to Burger King.
I'm on it, man. You know, I hear you. I hear you.
And then he's going to get the death penalty, but they take him to Burger King.
It's madness.
So the issues around fear and you know, is this
no, I get it. We're getting near the end here, John, and
yes.
You know, we didn't get a chance to talk about your heart because we're getting ready.
Oh,
but,
no. But no. This is the art here, the art of talking about this stuff. And like,
so tell the people who are listening and watching us how they can get to you and learn more about you. They can
get to me at my website, johnsimsprojects.com. I've been working on a couple different things. One is for the Corona pandemic, I did a coronavirus video game. You can check it out at johnsimsprojects.com/Corona Killer. Corona with a K, killer with a A at the end. And check that out. And then hopefully be looking for my op-ed piece that should be coming out when I finish it. But I want to thank you guys, Bill and John.
Listen, man, we're going to have you back because
putting together this platform to be able to talk, and
we're going to have you back, man. There's a lot that you've opened up here, man.
But I think it's important for you guys to be out and being able to speak from your place as white men, and speak from a space of justice, and to talk to other folks within the white community and to hold them accountable in ways that I don't have access to hold anybody accountable. You know, saying that's very, very important, that we have these conversations, and that we wish for American society that there's a sense of respect, and there's a sense of at least a space for talking. And
you have thrown down the gauntlet, John Sims. No, man. John Sims, artist, poet, thought provoker, collaborator, visual. I gotta say, historical, visual, racial artist extraordinaire. And I'm not blowing smoke, man, because when you meet John Sims in person, seeing him one thing on this is it, but when you meet him in person, and John, you have an aura about you, and a heart and a mind that runs so deep for not only your community, but for humanity at large. And I got to tell you, from a personal point of view and position, you made my life better in the short time that we've known each other. And having you, knowing that you're walking the same planet, gives me hope too.
Amen. I'm happy to partner with you, John. Man.
Yes, definitely. Well, let's be in touch. We got lots of work to do. You know that big Confederate flag on I-4 and I-75?
I know right where it's at, man.
You know, the guy took it down just recently.
Is he going to burn it?
Well, no, he took it down because he's afraid that somebody else might take it down. So that you are in one of the biggest Confederate flags flying in America right now. The owner of that property took that flag down because he was afraid that somebody might roll up and take. So that shows you the space that we are in right now.
Yeah,
and
powerful, man.
And I hope that we're able to make something happen. Well, thank you guys so much. And,
appreciate you, man.
All right, buddy.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected, and, as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO!